Hi, and welcome to R106 Learning Objective 2 Primary Research. And one of the research activities that's suggested is what we call an observation and a physical analysis. And one of the ways that I use to understand a product is to get a hold of it and obviously looking at it. But I find it helps me to focus my attention by sort of producing a series of quick sketches. So that's what I'm trying to demonstrate for you for this lesson. So what we're basically going to do is sketch it up, take some dimensions, and while we're doing that, start asking ourselves some questions about the product itself. So I'm just going to put that to one side so I can see it. So it's going to just sit up there for me. And start off just with a sort of a quick, as rough a sketch as you can, just to sort of collect some details about the product. So we sort of having a look at it. It's got sort of two holes on the halfway point there. I'll do some dimensioning a little bit later, but this is really just sort of mapping out where everything sits in the design, having a quick look and sort of trying to decide. I've noticed that these holes, for example, just here, they're slightly longer and they're actually just close to the halfway point. I would have sort of felt that they would have been further up, but they're not. They're slightly lower down. So little sketch there, and then I noticed that the switches are actually sort of quite a little bit higher than I would expect. I thought, you sort of have this idea they would have been in the middle, but they're actually further up to the top of the design, which is sort of, again, it raises a question for me straight away. Why is the designer or the engineer place the switches so high up? So there's a quick rough sketch, and what I'm doing is sort of turn it into an engineering drawing and draw it from the side, like so. So I can then line those up. The plug socket going to be there, the switches, they're at a slight angle, so I just sort of look at it from that. You've got a sort of slope, flick that as a nice click. I'll make a note of that in a second. So we'll have one switch sort of like that, and then another switch like that. And let's just make a little note that it would click. And that actually sounds like that, and the feeling of a sound in design is really important. It's what we call haptic response. And it's how we sort of know that something's happened. When you switch something on, you're happy that it's switched on if it gives you a nice firm clicky sound. Like keyboards make clicky sounds, and we talk about the haptic response, the feel of something. So it's not just how something looks in design and engineering, it's also about how it actually has a feel. We do this when we pick up things and feel the weight of objects. Some mobile phones and products like mobile phones actually have added weight. It does no other purpose than make the phone feel heavier, because we like something to feel more solid. So that's a sort of a design illusion, if you will, on a product. So I've produced a little quick sketch of the product, and I'm starting to sort of look at it in a little bit more detail and having to think about, what do I see? I noticed that the edges are sort of, these are quite rounded, so I'm just going to add that into my sketch and make a little note. And right now, again, it's just about making observations, but it also starts triggering off some thoughts. Why would that edge be rounded? I'm thinking, is that a safety feature? Is it purely aesthetic? Which starts me thinking about the questions I need to be asking myself are function, functional questions, aesthetic questions, and manufacturing questions. How do you actually manufacture it? So that sort of FA and M help me think about my analysis and my design. I did notice that in here there's copper sort of lining the plug socket, so they've got a sort of like a copper like a shield almost, or like a centre. I'll make a note of that, and again, I'm happy to leave that as a question. You know, why is it done? I did notice that in this top one here, just inside, you might just be able to see it, just inside of there, as the plug comes into contact, there's actually two copper there, so there's almost copper contact. I know that that's the earth on the plug, so I imagine that's something to do with making sure that the product's earthed before it does anything else. So I'm thinking that's a sort of, it's definitely a function of the safety of the product, that it is safe. I noticed that these holes here are covered, and I know that I can see here there's a tiny white plastic, like sloped, sort of, if I draw the inside of this plug in here, like if I do that, you can just see that there's a sort of sloped white piece of plastic, like a little lever, and these have sort of like guards or shields to stop you coming into contact with the electricity that would be sitting behind these. One would be live and one would be neutral. So again, from a functional point of view, there's definitely safety features being built in. So again, looking at the product, and now we see on the back of the product, and again, this would be sort of quite difficult to sketch in any real detail, but I'll just sort of throw this up. Got my rounded corners, and we've got a sort of metal, and I noticed that that metal, that's interesting, that metal connects all the way to the socket where it screws in. You know, these screw holes here. And by the looks of it, I'll just bring it down again, it looks like they're into the earth. So it looks like the screw holes are earthed. And again, I found me asking myself, you know, why is that the case? Is it a safety feature? You know, do I need to think about that? Again, we're analysing products for improvements. Is it something that needs to happen? And then we have another black plastic sort of area here. Black plastic. Now, and again, this is where I bring myself now to start thinking about looking for details. What are the clues that might tell me? Is there a clue on the material? There's definitely some numbers here. There's BS, let me write that one down, that could be important because it's BS for British Standard 1363. So I think that's maybe, as this is primary research, then this is definitely going to be a little bit of secondary research that I'm going to carry out. There's an earth symbol there. It says it's 13 amp, 250 volts. There's no clue to what plastic is, so I'm going to have to sort of figure it out from my experience of sort of getting a feel for the material, and the same for the outer plastic. Again, I'm going to have to make some assumptions about that, or do some secondary research to confirm my suspicions of what I think it might be. What I do like, I think this is a clever little feature, is down here there's clips for the installation screws. That's really clever, because that's something, you know, if you imagine fitting loads of these and you keep losing these screws, well actually every time you pick one up, the designers created a little space to store the components that you need to actually assemble it. So I think that's a fantastic, clever little idea. So there's my initial thoughts. I need to think about perhaps what materials and components are involved, and sort of while I'm improving this, so what I would sit down now is that I would start, got a slightly thicker pen, and I'd start outlining, and we need to curve that, make sure it's soft edged. That's how it sort of fits into the wall. But then there's this black piece on the back. So now as I'm going round my drawing, improving it, a dark outline helps an object to stand out. I can start thinking about, well, what material would it be? What did it feel like? What impression did I get from the material? Give these a little bit of shadow. Light comes from the left. So shade in there like so, just to give that little bit of a 3D illusion. You just see that it starts to look like it's three-dimensional. I'm not going to worry too much about the back sketch, but just want to give the impression that I've looked at the design and the drawing and how I think about the material. So a little bit of shadow, a bit of grey pencil or a grey marker. These will cast the shadow there, just giving it a little bit of 3D to make the drawing a bit more interesting. Just from a presentation point of view, it's good engineering design, a little bit of practice your drawing skills while you're thinking. And while I've been doing that, I've been having a little think, and I'm sort of, it's a hard, white, scratch resistant sort of plastic. I've got a feeling that it isn't a thermoplastic. It doesn't look like any thermoplastic I'm familiar with. So I'm sort of guessing at a thermoset. That's my thinking, a thermoset. I will confirm that with some research. And I'm thinking about R109 now. And I've learned about urea and melamine. So is it, looks a bit like a G, sorry. Is it urea formaldehyde? Is it melamine formaldehyde? What do they make it out of? So I'm going to need some secondary research here. And I'm thinking on the back, so let's just make a little note, material. And on the back here, now this black plastic, that doesn't feel like, and it doesn't look like a thermoset. That definitely looks like a thermoplastic. So we'll label that up. Thermoplastic. Again, it's sort of has a little bit of texture to it, flexibility. I'm wondering, something like polyethylene or polypropylene, something along those lines. There's no recycling code to help me, and I can't carry out any chemical analysis, so I'm just going to leave it at that basically. The only other thing I'm seeing a lot of is brass, because copper is usually a little bit darker, and I can't see any copper. I'm seeing brass. I'm definitely seeing this metal. It looks like it's been coated with something, but it definitely looks like it's some sort of, feels like steel. Again, these are really sort of question marks, things I need to sort of go back and investigate further when I actually take this apart and maybe find out some more clues. But that, in sort of 15 minutes, is my observation and sort of collection of my physical analysis. And again, I haven't really answered any questions, but I've definitely collected together the right sort of starting points for going on to do some secondary research. So my primary observations are going to help me identify secondary research. I found this, which is really interesting. That's something to do with British standards, so I can research. I've got some thoughts about the materials that it's manufactured from. I definitely would be interested in sort of the haptic response. You know, that might be something we could improve. You know, that felt really quite stiff to do. So if I was going to improve this as a design, you know, perhaps to be used by young, well, not the young so much, but by elderly people perhaps, it might be if this was easier or bigger to operate so that you've got more leverage, you know, that might be a design improvement that we could explore. So to finish it up, for a few more seconds, is a bit of presentation. And then we'd use that space there to put your details in. Hope you enjoy.